Stories at the museum, making these videos sometimes can be a little bit tricky, especially with sets that take inspiration from larger universes like Star Wars or Marvel. There's just so much history and lore already there, so it becomes a little bit more difficult to choose what to highlight. The Star Wars theme is one we will revisit at the museum quite often, but today's set is going to be a smaller but one of the most iconic ships in the entire original trilogy. If the first impression we get of the Empire is the Devastator Star Destroyer, then the corresponding Rebel ship that gives us a first impression has to be the Tantive IV, first seen in the first shot of the New Hope, desperately speeding away from the Devastator Star Destroyer. There is a whole backstory into how the Tantive IV came to be in this predicament, but for that, I'd say watch Rogue One. That's a good one. Which myself, as recently rewatched and thoroughly enjoyed once more. In Star Wars lore, the Tantive IV was designed by the Corellian Engineering Corporation. This highly modified CR-90 Corvette was a standard ship used by Alderaan officials. In this case, our Tantive IV was used by Bail Organa during and after the Clone Wars, then ultimately being used by Leia Organa to take the plans to the Death Star and recruit Obi-Wan Kenobi to join the rebellion. The Tantive IV also made an appearance in Rise of Skywalker as part of the Rebel base. Measuring over 5 inches, 14 centimeters high, 24 inches, 62 centimeters long, and 7 inches, 19 centimeters wide, this version of the Tantive IV is actually a pretty sizable playset. There was a UCS version released in 2001, which was a legend in its own right. Similar to most LEGO Star Wars sets, there's, always subsequent and updated versions released by LEGO. Kind of makes it more exciting as you build, as building techniques and pieces change and update, we get updated models for each new generation. Tantive IV was first called the Rebel Blockade Runner. Small, nimble, and a speedy ship at that. However, it had a few tricks up its sleeve as well. We didn't receive as much screen time of the Tantive IV during the original series, so I'm pretty glad that it made its cameo appearance at the end of Rogue One. Kind of a nice send-off for an iconic vessel. The Tantive IV's hull was mainly colored white with a couple of red accents, and then blaster burns, of course. Most of the CR-90 Corvettes were painted in this kind of color scheme. The interior walls of the ship were also painted in a fairly similar way. Since it was a vessel for the state diplomats of Alderaan, the ship featured dining rooms for hosting state dinners and conference centers for negotiations. The 11 engines of the Tantive IV made up the stern of the ship, and a central section was topped with 4 cannons. Next to it was a section of a ship with a passenger entrance lift, which lowered down into a landing platform. A cannon was fixed on top of this section as well, and it also carried 4 individual 8-passenger escape pods and then 8 individual smaller 4-passenger escape pods. So getting into more of the details here of the Tantive IV, we have the cockpit in the very front with some fuselage paneling right behind it, and of course, the classic Star Wars greebling design that we're going to see on the side. In the middle of the fuselage, we have rotating cannons. The main fuselage panel is right on the top below the cannons. And on the very side, we have the main fuselage greebling details that adorn this set. Moving on to the escape pod here, this detaches from the actual array, which we'll see in the maintenance video. And we have some greebling on the sides as well. So right behind the cockpit, there is some fuselage paneling, which connects the main fuselage to the cockpit. And we have some greebling too here, and some nice paneling. There's a lot of edges on this set. So we have 2 fins, the bottom stabilizer fin and the middle stabilizer fin. The middle one does hinge up and down. The stories that came from the production of the original Star Wars films are always so fascinating to me, especially given the leaps in innovation in visual effects, considering that's more of my day job anyway. Although I will say that the use of miniatures and motion control photography, not used so much anymore, but we can still learn and appreciate this production process. The ship's design actually comes from the initial design of the Millennium Falcon. You see, Space 1999 was a TV series that ran in 1975 to 1977, and it featured a ship called the Eagle Transporter, which was very similar to the initial Falcon design. The ILM model makers then redesigned the Falcon to its final look as we all know and love today. But the original Falcon design that was very similar to the Space 1999 Eagle Transporter, that would eventually become the Tantive IV. It was a giant model that required a high level of intricacy. It was about 194 centimeters in length. Fun fact, there was actually a small centerfold in the cockpit interior, which obviously wasn't visible on camera. They also needed to make a smaller version of the Tantive IV because they needed to accommodate the limited length of the Dysterflex camera track, which was the motion control photography that was used in the films. Jumping back to the actual details of the Tantive IV, we'll spin around to take a look at the rear of the ship. The main engine bodies, there are around 11, exactly 11 of them, with some thruster details and exhaust portals to match. So on the very top row, we have 4 engines, and we have little greebling details on the very top of each engine. There's also a paneling on the top of one engine, which I assume is kind of a repair paneling. There's a heat exhaust top on the top of the rear engines, or on the top row of the engines. You have some greebling here too, and then you see that large connector on the bottom left-hand screen, which connects all 8 engines together. On the sides, we have a little bit more greebling too, and we have some nice paneling. It's a little bit more subtle here. And you can see the middle row has 3 engines. The middle row has 3 engines, and then the bottom row has 4 engines. So it's a 4-3-4 setup entirely. You know, I hesitate to utilize many examples from the Rise of Skywalker film because, of course, everybody has their own strong opinions on that film. But for myself, I don't really see it as kindly as the other canon films. However, in order to finish our story of the Tantive IV, I think it's fair to dive into the story of how the Tantive IV was recovered and returned to General Organa. Many years after the end of the Galactic Civil War, a formal Imperial senator discovered the remains of the Tantive IV. This senator was sympathetic to Leia's cause and returned it to her after repairing it, allowing Leia to be reunited with the ship that was her personal flagship before, and now it became it once more. So the starship made its film appearance in the Battle of Exegol, tragically being destroyed by Darth Sidious when he used his Force lightning to destroy one of its engines. So let's spin around to take a look at some of these smaller details on the Tantive IV. So we'll start off with the large rotating cannon on the very top side. We have the primary cannons, and we have the stud shooting cannons right below it, and then additional greebling too. The radar array is towards the rear of the ship behind the main fuselage, and there's a large cylindrical base that makes up the bottom of it. Taking a closer look, there's small blaster details and then the rotating base on the bottom. I don't even know if to call it blasters or cannons, but we'll just go for blasters for now. The top fuselage has some great greebling details too, and a little bit of a unique design for the slanted panelings, just smaller pieces here. On the very top, at the very front, we have cockpit windows and some opening paneling details here. These are all stickered pieces, but we still get a nice amount of matching between the stickers and the pieces themselves. The top of the cockpit also has some greebling elements, mainly of a sticker piece. And let's reset the Tantive IV to be looking straight forward. So the Tantive IV lives on through updated LEGO models, new media, Hasbro collectors, fleet lines, which look pretty awesome, and die-cast models. So the miniature model of the Tantive IV used in the shooting of the actual original trilogy was sold at auction for $450,000. I believe it was one of the most expensive Star Wars items ever sold at auction. So from our very first impression of the Tantive IV in The New Hope, to the LEGO models that we admire today, it's been a pleasure to dive into the lore, history, and background of this legendary Star Wars ship. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy seeing more of this documentary style of films about LEGO sets, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.